Organizing and summarizing data. This is a key part of descriptive statistics. First, we look at qualitative data, nominal and ordinal data types, and constructing frequency tables for that data. So representing the data or summarizing the data in tables. Then we look at, for the same data, qualitative data, creating charts from the tables, usually of type bar chart or pie chart. Finally, we look at quantitative data, and quantitative data can be of two types. We have discrete data, which is whole numbers, and we can summarize that using tables and bar charts. And finally, we have continuous data, which is real numbers, and we can organize and summarize that in tables and histograms. So the basic task in descriptive statistics is to count the number of objects in a data set. Now, we know that a nominal and ordinal data is also called categorical. That means the data is in categories. So what we want to do is count the number of items in each category. Here we have an example of nominal data, and the categories are job categories: managerial, clerical, or supervisory. So we simply want to know how many of the data items are in each category. We do that by constructing a frequency table. We create the category headings, which are the data values in the variable category, job category, and then we can just tally them. And when we tally them, we get a frequency. So you can see there's 8 clerical, 14 managerial, and 11 supervisory, and a total of 33 data items in the data set. And that from that frequency table, we can then also create a relative frequency. So we can see the relative size of each category. So you can see that clerical makes up 24% of all the data, managerial makes up 43%, and supervisory makes up 33%. So we create a frequency table and then usually a relative frequency calculation.
So how do we build an actual frequency distribution in Excel? So let's take an example here, and we will look at this example, and there'll be an exercise based on this example. So you've got a list here of data, and it's a standard data set. It's taken from the demo.save data set, which you're already familiar with. And you can see that there's in that data set, there's a variable called job category, and each row is one subject. So we want to create the frequency distribution for job category. So in Excel, we use a tool called Pivot Table. And the Pivot Table tool enables us to group everything by job categories and count the number of jobs in each category. So you can see there's an example of what the Pivot Table tool does. When we run the Pivot Table, and the instructions will be in the assignment, we get these counts of different job categories. So you can see that 66 of the records were clericals, 56 were managerial, and 78 were supervisory. Just to note there, in the pivot table it says count of gender. We're actually counting the entire row, the entire subject. So we're saying there's 66 rows which had clerical as the job category. But the way the pivot table works is you have to pick a column to count. So you could count age or gender or income. It wouldn't matter what's in there. It's just counting, does it exist or not exist. So if there's an F in gender, it exists. If there's a 72 in income, it exists. So the only column that you don't want to count is a column that has blanks in it. So any other column is fine. So basically that our frequency distribution is automatically calculated. Our frequency table is automatically calculated using a pivot table tool. And then if we want to, we can then add, so on the right hand side here you can see that we now have the pivot table, but we add on an extra column, the relative frequency, and we can calculate that manually. So we can just use some simple Excel formulas to calculate a relative frequency. So what we're doing there is we're calculating what percentage of 200 is 66, what percentage of 200 is 78, etc. And we can actually, in the pivot table itself, calculate percentages instead of counts. Instead of count of gender, we could have said percentage of column total. So there's 2 or 3 different ways to do that. But we can very quickly calculate frequency distributions in Excel using an automatic tool. And this is very important because generally we want to do a lot of these in descriptive statistics. We need to calculate frequency distributions for almost every variable, and we want to be able to do it quickly. So you can practice that in the assignment.
So from the previous slide, we've created a frequency table, which is this pivot table on the left hand side showing the frequency for each category. And we also then, from that, we can using simple formulas generate relative frequencies for each category. So we want to convert those into bar graphs or bar charts. And here's the bar chart for a frequency distribution. So you can see simply that each column here is a category, clerical, managerial, supervisory, and the height of the column represents the size of the count. So the advantage, of course, being with the charts that the relative proportions of different categories is more visible than they are in tables. And similarly, we can generate a chart for the relative frequency. In this case, the y-axis, instead of being actual numbers, is relative frequencies. So we can see here that clerical makes up 33% of all job categories.
So the next task, and it's the next assignment, is to create a frequency table, but this time in SPSS instead of Excel. So you open the data file that we've already seen in SPSS, and there's further instructions on that in the assignment. And when the file is open, you go to the Analyze menu and select Descriptive Statistics. And from there, select the Frequencies option, and that pops up the Frequencies dialog box. On the left hand side, you've got a list of all the variables, and on the right side, the variables chosen is blank. You simply select the job category variable from the left and move it to the right, either by pressing the arrow or dragging and dropping it. There are other options we can choose. We can calculate some statistics and some charts, but for the time being, we'll just create a basic frequency table. So that means you have to make sure that the display frequencies tables checkbox in the bottom left corner is checked. And when you've done that, you'll get this output. When you press OK, and you get frequency statistics and job category frequency table. At the bottom there, you see the frequency table. You've got the three different categories in the total, and there are all of the different type of frequency calculations. The first column there is the frequency, which we've already calculated in Excel. The second one is the percent column. That's the relative frequency. The valid percent is the percent including, excluding invalid data, so ignore that. And then finally we have the cumulative percent, and you can see that matches the figures given in the previous calculations. And cumulative percent is useful for generating what's called an ogive chart, and we'll look at that later on. Instead of a bar chart, we can use a pie chart to represent frequencies as well. In this case, from the job category data, we can generate a pie chart. And the pie chart takes the actual counts to make up a pie, but what it shows is the relative proportion. So effectively, the pie chart is a visual representation of the relative frequency. So you can see the detailed relative frequency in the table, but in the pie chart you can see the big picture, which is that each one of the categories is nearly a third.